I paid for my window seat, but apparently this woman thought her son's desires were worth more than that. As soon as she boarded, she came straight towards me and said, "Can you switch seats? My son needs to sit by the window," as if I was obligated to give up what was mine just because she decided to. But I'm not the type to give in to freeloaders. And this trip was just beginning. I've never been the type to be particular about airplane seats. I'm not one of those people who pay extra to sit in the front row or who make a scene over an armrest. But there is one thing I do enjoy: window seats. And if I purchased my seat in advance exactly for that, you can be sure I won't surrender it easily. So there I was, boarding my flight, ready for a peaceful journey. I took my seat, put on my headphones, placed my backpack in the space under the seat, and was already mentally preparing myself to ignore any unnecessary talk from strangers. Everything seemed to be going well until she arrived. The woman came striding down the corridor as if she was about to resolve a global issue. In front of her was a little boy of about 5, clutching a teddy bear so tightly that it looked like a captive. As soon as she got close to my seat, she halted and examined me as if trying to determine whether I was someone who was going to obey her commands without hesitation. And that's when my alert instinct kicked in. This woman had the typical expression of someone who demands things from others. She doesn't request, she doesn't propose, she doesn't bargain, she insists. The kind of person who believes that the entire world has to function according to her personal preferences. I knew it was coming. She took a deep breath, crossed her arms, and looked at me as if she were about to deliver a court ruling. "Can you switch seats? There we go. Here we go." I took out one of my headphones, trying to pretend that maybe I hadn't comprehended correctly. "Excuse me, my son wants to sit in the window." She repeated irritably, "Can you swap with us?" Oh, yes. Her son wants to sit in the window. And obviously that meant that I, some stranger who paid for the ticket with his own money, should just get up and walk away as if I were a silent extra in the great drama of this woman's life. I looked at the boy, who was silent, not displaying a hint of excitement for this supposed dream of sitting in the window. The boy didn't even appear to care, but the mother, oh, she seemed determined to make it a matter of utmost importance. And that's when I realized it wasn't about the son. No, this was about her. The kind of people who think the world should submit to their will, who believe that everything can be resolved by raising their voice, who never accept no for an answer, because they're accustomed to gaining things through sheer persistence. But with me, it wasn't going to happen. I declined politely but firmly. I explained that I had chosen that seat intentionally and that I preferred to stay where I was. Simple, direct, and with no opportunity for discussion. She blinked a few times as if trying to grasp the fact that someone had the nerve to say no to her. Then she pursed her lips as if she had just bitten into a bitter lemon. "But he a child," she snapped, as if that would magically change my mind. Of course, she was going to resort to that argument, because in her mind, any request involving a child automatically invalidated the rights of others. And look, I have nothing against children, but do you know who should better organize their child's experience on the plane? The parents. If she wanted the child to sit in the window seat so badly, she should have reserved a seat like that or arrived earlier to exchange with someone before boarding. What she shouldn't have done was show up at the last moment and insist that a stranger give up his comfort just because she decided it was appropriate. But you know what's worse? She didn't accept the answer. Even after my refusal, she continued to stand there sighing, staring, trying to exert pressure on the silence, as if at any moment I was going to feel guilty enough to stand up and say, "Fine, I'm a terrible human being for wanting to stay in the seat I paid for. Please take my place only." Surprised that didn't happen, and that's when she decided that if she wasn't going to get it with words, she was going to get it with drama. She threw her hands up in the air, rolled her eyes, and let out a sigh so exaggerated that she looked like she was about to collapse. Then she looked around as if hoping that other passengers would join her and side with her. But nobody paid any attention, and that made her even more furious. She pulled her son by the arm, forced an irritated pout, and marched him to her seat 2 rows behind mine. But I knew this wasn't the end. People like that never surrender easily. She could have gone back to her seat for now, but that woman was still going to attempt something, and I was ready to witness the next act of the show. If there's one thing I've learned in this world, it's that freeloaders never accept defeat with their heads down. When this woman finally gave up and went to sit 2 rows back, I knew it wasn't over. That kind of person doesn't know how to lose. She had to find a way to come out victorious, to teach a lesson to anyone who dared to challenge her, and I didn't have to wait long to see what the next act of her drama performance would be. The flight was about to take off, and I was already settling into my seat, ready to disregard anything around me. But before the plane began to taxi, I heard a sound coming from behind. It was a cry, not a frantic cry, not one of those chaotic wails that some children make when they're genuinely distressed. It was a controlled, almost staged cry. Yes, the woman's boy was crying, but the problem wasn't the crying itself. The problem was her voice, loud and clear, narrating the events as if she were on a theater stage. "I know, my love," she said, with a tone of artificial compassion. "I know you just wanted to sit in the little window and watch the clouds." I took a deep breath. She was talking loud enough for everyone around to hear. This wasn't a normal conversation between mother and child. No. This was a show. "It's very sad when some people don't know how to sympathize," she continued, making a point of stressing the word sympathy as if it were a dagger in my back. It was so absurd that I almost started laughing. I mean, really, was that her plan? To make me look like a villain to the whole plane? I looked around at the other passengers. Some were visibly uncomfortable with the crying, but most were ignoring it. The truth is that no one on a plane wants to be dragged into a random dispute, but the woman didn't give up. "If only someone would be considerate enough to switch seats with you, dear." She sighed dramatically. Oh, well, if her first plan was to get me to give in under direct pressure, now, the strategy was different. She was trying to turn the whole environment against me, to get some other passenger to speak up, to get a judgmental look, to get someone to suggest, "Hey, man, give the seat to the kid. What's the issue?" But there was one small detail she hadn't considered. Nobody cared. I mean it. Nobody. The people on that plane were so accustomed to travel dramas that they simply didn't care. The couple next to me exchanged glances but remained silent. The gentleman in the row in front kept scrolling through his cell phone, completely ignoring it, and the stewardess, who was walking down the aisle at that very moment, didn't even glance in her direction. I could sense the woman's frustration growing. She wanted it to be a spectacle. She needed it to be a scandal, but with no audience to encourage her. Her plan was failing miserably, and best of all, her own son wasn't as involved in this charade. The little boy had already stopped crying. In fact, he seemed more fascinated by the teddy bear than in the window, which made me certain of what I already suspected. He never cared that much. This story was never about the boy. It was about her. It was about the fact that someone rejected her demand, and it bruised her ego to a degree that she just couldn't accept. And now she was stuck in her own little act, with no one to watch. The plane began to taxi, and little by little the murmur of voices dissolved into the sound of the engines gaining power. With my seatbelt secured and my headphones put back on, smirked to myself. She tried. She had failed. But knowing this type of person, I knew she wasn't finished yet. The plane was already in the air, flying steadily. As I looked out of my beautiful, comfortable, and well-earned window, the city below was vanishing, giving way to a sea of fluffy white clouds that, ironically, seemed more peaceful than the atmosphere inside that plane. Since the woman began her mission to turn me into the villain of the day, her little exaggerated show hadn't worked as intended. Her son had completely forgotten about the window and was playing with his teddy bear. But her, she didn't know when to quit. I could feel the energy of pure indignation radiating from the 2 rows behind, the kind of fury that only someone used to always getting what they want can possess. And as expected, she decided to retaliate. First came the kicks to my seat, subtle at first, almost as if by mistake, a little nudge here, a little tap there, just enough to make me notice. But as the minutes passed and I continued To disregard them, the kicks became more persistent. I looked out of the corner of my eye and saw that the boy was sitting properly, not even leaning against the seat in front of him. In other words, who was kicking her? Because, of course, if she didn't get what she wanted in a respectful manner, the next step was to behave like a spoiled child. But me, I'm patient. I let her exhaust herself a bit. I kept looking out of the window, pretending nothing was happening, which must have made her blood boil even more, because people like that crave a reaction. They don't know how to cope with the idea that their grand plan is being completely ignored. So she escalated the situation. The second attack, the dramatic conversation. It's unbelievable how some people don't have the slightest concern for others, she began, loud enough for at least 3 rows around to hear. The stewardess walked down the aisle just then, and I swear I saw the woman leaning forward slightly as if trying to attract attention to her monologue about being the mistreated victim. But again, nobody cared. The stewardess carried on as if nothing was happening, and the other passengers were too distracted with their own matters to pay any attention to this drama. But she didn't give up. The third attack. The odor attack. I smelled it before I even realized what was happening. She had opened some kind of homemade snack that smelled like it had come straight out of a chemical weapons facility. Something potent, something nauseating, something that made my nose scrunch and my stomach churn. In seconds, I heard the sound of plastic being crushed, and then the unmistakable sound of something being chewed with an open mouth. Ah, so that's how we were going to play now. Oh, good. I'd had enough. Without looking back, without lowering myself to her level, I simply raised my hand and signaled to the stewardess. The woman in uniform approached, smiling courteously. "What can I do for you?" I smiled back. "I think someone behind me is having trouble respecting other people's space. Could you check?" The stewardess looked back directly at her, and that was that. The scheme had turned against the manipulator, because now the attention she so desperately wanted was on her, but not in the way she had expected. The stewardess, with no patience for nonsense, asked directly, "Are you comfortable in your seat?" Silence. The woman turned red. She swallowed. "Yes, I am," she replied, forcing a fake grin. "Good," said the stewardess, before turning to her son. "And you, dear, do you need anything?" The boy, unaware of his mother's antics, shook his head. "No, ma'am, I'm fine." The stewardess smiled and went back to work, and the woman, well, for the first time since this flight began, she was silent. But I knew that deep down she was fuming, and I was enjoying it. After the stewardess intervened, the woman finally realized that she had lost. She didn't get my seat. She couldn't get the passengers to support her. Even worse, she was publicly called out without even being able to protest. The silence that followed was a blessing. The plane was peaceful. The boy was already asleep with his teddy bear pressed against his face, and I was enjoying my serenity as I looked out of the window, savoring my exclusive view. But even though I knew she wasn't going to attempt anything else, I could feel her frustration burning. People like that can't swallow their humiliation. They don't just accept loss and move on. They obsess over it. And that's exactly what she did. When the pilot announced that we would be landing in a few minutes, the woman decided she wasn't going to let this flight end without one more effort to come out on top. That's when she started complaining to the stewardess. I couldn't hear everything, but from the tone of her voice and the exaggerated gestures, I could tell she was trying to fabricate some absurd story about how rude and inconsiderate I had been during the flight. The stewardess listened with the patience of someone who deals with this kind of nonsense every day. But the final strike came when the woman said loud enough for me to hear, "I just hope people like that learn to be more mindful of others." Oh, so that was it the whole flight? She'd been trying to manipulate me, create drama, stir confusion, and now she wanted to emerge as the martyr of empathy and kindness. I couldn't tolerate it. I turned my head slowly and faced her, smiling, but not a friendly smile. That smile, the smile of someone who knows they've won. "I hope so," Ava replied quietly. "Mindfulness is something a lot of people need to learn, isn't it?" She hesitated. For the first time, the woman had no response. The stewardess had to suppress a smirk before saying "have a nice day" and walking away. The woman crossed her arms and turned her face to the window, which ironically wasn't hers, and remained there huffing in silence until landing. When we finally taxied to the landing gate and the belts could be unfastened, I got up without rushing, picked up my backpack, and started to walk calmly down the aisle. But the best part, as I walked through the plane, I heard a whisper coming from a gentleman in the next row. He didn't look at me, he didn't chuckle loudly, he didn't cause a scene. But as I passed, he simply said softly, Good fight. And that's how I knew I wasn't alone. That woman may have tried to turn the flight into her big poor victim act, but everyone saw it. Everyone understood. And at the end of the day, the only act that played out was her leaving, embarrassed, without the window and without the final word. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.